But I did it. I finished these 2 books. This was a whirlwind of emotions. The plot is plotting, but also like nothing is happening. Overall, this one's already in the 130 pages I've read so far more enjoyable than the entirety of this book. Make up your mind. Do we like him or not? Because I thought he betrayed us in this one instance, but now you're okay with him again. Make it make sense. Hi everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with another installment of Simplify My Series. So as you can tell by the title and the thumbnail, all that fun stuff, today we are tackling the All Souls series. The first book in this series was Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness, and this one I ended up reading last fall. I read it for my vampire vlog, so I'll leave it linked above if you're curious about that. But I really enjoyed it. I didn't really know what I was getting into, but I really enjoyed my time reading the first book and ended on a pretty big cliffhanger. So today, what we're going to be doing, or at least today what we're going to be starting over the next, hopefully, week or so, is the next 2 books in the trilogy. So here is where it gets a little funky. This series was originally a trilogy. It finished with the Book of Life. The second one is Shadow of Night. The third one is the Book of Life. This is where it finished. However, the author has written more in the series. There is one more book out and there's a 5th one coming out this year. I don't know what those are about. I don't know if it's a continuation of our series or if it's a spin-off. Like, at first I thought it was a spin-off with some of the other characters, but now I'm not so sure. But regardless, what I've decided to do for the sake of this video is just pretend that it is a trilogy. And then if I do like it, maybe we'll continue with the other ones, or if I like how it concluded. But like, it was originally written as a trilogy, so that's how I'm going to go into this video. With that being said, we have 2 books to read in this video. As I'm pretty sure, as usual with other books in this series, I am going to spoil the events of the first book, especially because it's going to be hard to talk about the second book and the third book without spoiling how the first one ended. But I'm going to try to stay pretty spoiler-free when it comes to these 2 books. So that's my plan. I actually started Shadow of Night last night. I am 3 chapters in. I'm 42 pages, so quite literally barely in it. These books are thick. So like, this book is about 580 pages, and then the third book in the series is about 560. So they're pretty chunky. I do have the audiobooks on Audible, but I really like the audiobooks. That's kind of how I listened to the first book. So, giving you kind of a synopsis of what this series is. The first book, A Discovery of Witches. We follow our main characters, Diana and Matthew, and in this world, it's basically they're magical mythical creatures that have been categorized into 3 separate categories. You've got witches, you have demons, and you have vampires. And witches and vampires are pretty much exactly what you expect. Demons are humanoid. They're basically humans. I mean, they're all humans, but like, they look like your average human, except for what makes a demon is that they are incredibly smart. So it's not like the little little red guys with the horns and, you know, spiritual spirits and stuff like that you would expect in other books. They are humans. They just are, like, their attributing factor is that they are geniuses. So in the beginning of the first book, Diana is descended from the Salem witches, or a family that took place or was alive during the Salem witch trials. And so she has absolutely no desire to continue with her basically like a lineage. Like, she has no desire to be a witch. Her parents died when she was really, really young, and she lived with, I believe, her aunt and her aunt's partner, and they kind of didn't really tell her a whole lot about her stuff, but she also just didn't want to know. So she's been studying at Oxford. She is a professor. She is studying one day in the library, doing some research for a paper of hers, and asks for a very specific manuscript from the archives. brings it forward, realizes once she opens it that it's kind of magical and weird and stuff is going on. She's like, no thank you, and sends it back. Well, that specific document or book is like a grimoire of sorts, and it's called Ashmole 580, what is it, 782. And so this book has been spelled so that only certain people can find it. She happens to be one of them, and everybody wants it. So you've got other witches who are out against her who want it, you've got vampires who want it, and you've got demons who want it, and she's the only one who can find it, and so they all want her to help them. Now that's why Matthew originally shows up, is he also wants this, and each different group of people thinks that it holds the key to something within their specific race and their specific group. Matthew does originally approach her because he does want this manuscript, but it becomes much more than that. He becomes really protective of her. He falls in love with her. They create a bond. They end up getting married in the first book, and he is basically her protector. And what ends up happening is that she finds out that her parents were brutally murdered by other witches. So like she is having some kind of memory of what's going on. Her magic was bound because it's incredibly powerful, and so she is trying to learn her magic because there's not really anyone who can teach her because she hasn't wanted to for so long, and now all the witches who could possibly teach her are out to get her. And so, because no one wants her and Matthew to be together because it's against like the code for species to intermingle like that. And so where this book ends is basically they've decided that the only way that they are going to get to help her learn her own magic, she has learned how to time walk, which basically just means time travel, and they go back in history. And they specifically go back to, I'm trying to remember if it says here, to like Elizabethan England. So that's how the book ends, is them time walking into the past in the hopes of finding this manuscript, but also, before anybody else can figure out where it is, but also having maybe a witch in the past be able to help Diana learn her magic a little bit more. That's where we start when we come into Shadow of Night. Now, Shadow of Night starts almost directly after the events of the first one. They quite literally start with them plopping down in London or England or wherever the heck they are. I don't actually know where they are in the world, but he has this old lodge place that Matthew was old. Matthew was old. So he was alive during this time. And so they plopped down in the place where he lived, where he kind of like congregated with a bunch of different people. Like in this lodge, we've already met a bunch of his friends. You meet Christopher Marlowe. You meet George Chapman. You meet, who was the other guy? Prince Henry or something. Like he's got this group of people who were like big names before they became big names. And so they basically, so far, again, I'm quite literally barely into it. What has happened so far is they plopped down in this place. They are all taken aback by the fact that Matthew was in a place that he said he wasn't going to be. He said he was going to be. I can't remember where he is, but he's like, the Matthew of that time period is off doing something. And so he's come back early and is married to a witch. And they're all like, this is insane. I think they are vampires, maybe a demon or two, and then just regular humans, but no witches. So the fact that he has married a witch is insane to them. And so at this point, he drops down and they are trying to help her adjust to Elizabethan England because she is real bizarre. She's out of sorts. She's out of place. She's a foreigner. She talks weird, and they're trying to come up with a backstory for her. And Matthew has told them kind of that they have time traveled. And so whether they believe him or not, they're like, okay, this is bizarre. Let's come up with a backstory for you. And then she is needing to find a witch to train her ASAP. So that's where we're at as far as where we are in the book. I did look up a synopsis just to remind myself of all the nitty-gritty details of this, which I think was really helpful because I remembered them time traveling and I remembered a lot of the big things, but I couldn't remember some of the names. So having those names in my head, if they play a part in this, will be good. I'm very excited because it's set in a time period that is different. I love historical time periods. I don't think I have much that's set in Elizabethan England. I usually tend to go towards like the Regency Victorian England vibes. So I'm really curious to see how this is going to work. I'm already not loving the relationship already, which is weird because I was so on board for them. But like Matthew kind of like adjusts who he used to be into like who he was in the first book into who he was at this time period. So like he's already starting to like take control. So like she doesn't like he'll answer questions before she can. And there's just a couple of things that I can't figure out if it's because it's the time period and he's kind of like diving back into his old self, and that's pretty normal, like women wouldn't speak for themselves, or if he's just like stepping on her toes, because she didn't let him in the first book. So I'm interested to see where that's gonna go. I don't really know the plot of this. I just know that they're gonna try to find like this someone to train her and this book. Like that is the goal that they have in this book. So I'm interested to see where we're gonna go from here. I have no idea about the third book. I haven't even looked into what that one's about yet until we finish this one. So I'm hoping to come to you when I've reached halfway in this book, just to give myself an idea of what's gonna happen in here, and then I'll tell you my thoughts so far, like once we reach that point. But that is the plan for this video, is to read these two books. So I hope you guys enjoy whatever this is going to turn into, and get comfy, because I don't know how long this is going to be, but if the intro is any indication, I'm going to talk a lot. Hello, I am about halfway through Shadow of Night, and I'm here to give you initial thoughts so far on this book. I am 288 pages in this book. Goodreads says I'm just over halfway. I think it's wrong. I think the pages are off on Goodreads, but either way, I am I'm pretty smack dab in the middle of this book. And I am so conflicted. I really don't know what to think, because the plot is plotting, but also like nothing is happening. Like they're doing things. Like Matthew and Diana have like gone to a few different places, and this book is set in a bunch of different parts, and so every time they go to a new location, there's a new part. And it started off at like this lodge place where Matthew was known to spend a lot of his time at this point. And then like the second location was his family home, because he was called there. And that section was really interesting. I liked that because we got to see some people that we've learned about in the first book, but we haven't seen in person. So it was really interesting to see that. I liked seeing the dynamic of Matthew. That section we really got a lot of, he's kind of been keeping a lot of secrets from Diana, and he's very open about the fact that he's got secrets from her. But like, we kind of have them having a lot of powwows at that section to talk about this. And then there's just a lot like dynamic wise with the family that I find very interesting. So like that section, fascinating. I really like that. But that ended, and now we're in, I don't even know where we are. We're in a different part of London because Matthew has to do stuff because of who he was at the time. And we still don't have a witch to teach Diana, which is the whole point. One of the whole points of going back in time is find this manuscript, which they have not done, and go back in time to like see if someone can help her with her magic, because there's no one in the current time that'll do it. And so neither of these things are happening. And I'm like, what is the point? We're literally watching the two of them go through his history and have him relive stuff. And they are changing things a little bit, and there's some stuff going on with them as a couple, but like the whole point of them going back in time is to do these things, and they're not doing the things. Also, I do not like Matthew in this book, which is fascinating because, like, yes, he was super overprotective in the first book. Totally get it. But she would call him out on it, and he'd be like, okay, I'm going to be protective, but, like, I get where you're coming from. In this book, it's like he's reverting back to his 18th century self, whereas a woman is property and must do exactly what her husband says. And Diana is like, that's not me. That's not us. Yes, I will pretend, and I will, you know, carry on and do all the things that like a woman would do at this time period, learn how to take care of a household and stuff. But like between the two of us, when it's just us, we have to still be us, and it's not. Like, he's a totally different person. I mean, he gets better. He was really bad at the beginning, and I couldn't stand him, but he's gotten a little bit better. And then something got thrown into the works, and now he's back to being his ridiculous, overprotective self, which I get because we're at a time period where, for multiple reasons, women were not thought of very highly. She's also a witch, which is not great. And then there's a bunch of like witch burnings and witch trials happening right now. Not physically where they are. They've been able to stay out of where it's located in England, or in Europe, but like they're happening at this time period, so that's also causing issues for them to be able to find a witch. So it's like, I don't care, but I'm also interested to see where it's going to go. If I was reading this on my own and not like for a video purpose, I would have probably soft DNF'd this, in the sense of like I would want to pick it up again one day, but like we're gonna pause for now. But because I'm reading it for a video, I'm kind of like, I don't want to say forcing myself through it, because that's not true. I am enjoying elements of it, and when I'm actively like physically listening, because I do have the audiobook, because these books are large, and the audiobook is like 24 hours long. I think I've got this last section at my speed is about 6 hours, and it's just like, when I'm reading it's fine, but then I put it down and I don't want to pick it back up. So I'm struggling, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I don't know if the third book we stay in this time period or we go back to the present day. We also have the most interesting parts, okay, I will say the most interesting parts of this book are that at random times we have a chapter from the present day. So like, we just had one with a character named Marcus who we met in the first book, who is like Matthew's son, kind of. And that was an interesting thing, but it just kind of pinpointed that like what they're doing in the past is changing history a little bit. And then there was one chapter with Isabeau, I think is her name, which is Matthew's mom. And we kind of see a few things like how they're trying to keep track of Diana and Matthew in the 18th century, but doing it in our current time. So like there's been like two or three different chapters that are just randomly placed in, and those are the most interesting parts, and I don't know why. So I guess I'm struggling is what I'm saying. I don't know how this book's going to end, because maybe it's just a hard book to get into, and then by the end it'll be great and fine and everything will be peachy and I'll be excited to read the third one. But as of right now, I don't expect to read more than these three. Like, I have no desire to pick up the fourth one and continue. So we'll see. It's not a great update, but that doesn't mean this book won't be a good book. It just means that right now the ending, there's a lot of pressure on the ending for it to be really good, because the first book, in my opinion, was so good. That is why I wanted to continue, but now that I'm continuing, I'm like ambivalent almost, and I just don't care what's going on, nor do I care about these characters, which is sad because I cared so much. So I'm thinking, even though this is a time period, and I thought this would be like the thing that I was so interested in, because it's in Elizabethan, like England, and that's like a time period I don't know about, and it's really fascinating. And she's meeting all of these like famous people. Like, there's a glossary in the back of this book that pinpoints every single person she met at every different location and like who they are in history, because Matthew, of course, just rubs elbows with all of these people who are like actually famous, like in real life. And then like there's randomly there was a guy that like was one of Matthew's closest friends that was like part of his brotherhood that caused issues at the beginning, which is why they kind of moved to the second location. It's not really, but it's part of the reason. And then he just showed back up and they were fine with him. And then like a chapter later, they were mad at him for the stuff that he did at the beginning. And I was like, okay, make up your mind. Do we like him or not? Because I thought he betrayed us in this one instance, but now you're okay with him again. Make it make sense. I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I am very conflicted, and right now it's not the most entertaining, nor do I care the most about what's going on, but I have hope that as we get farther into this book, there'll be some more kind of like revelations and stuff will actually happen, because we've now, like where I'm at, one of the two reasons they went back in time is starting to happen. So there's hope, but I don't know. I don't know. I officially finished the second book, Shadow of Night, and actually technically started the third one. So yesterday, I ended up plowing through the last little section. Well, okay, so I finished it yesterday, but the night before, I ended up plowing through a bunch of this, and it ended up getting 3 stars from me. I think this suffered from like second book syndrome, but also it suffered from the same thing that the second book of the Outlander series suffered from, and that is that we went back in time to a time period where, in theory, I should have loved every second of it. I should have loved the time period. I should have loved watching them adjust to this new time period, but I didn't. I didn't care about what was going on. I didn't care about the characters. They felt like totally different characters to me. We did learn a lot about her magic specifically, and that part kicked in about somewhere after the halfway point. I think it wasn't quite the halfway point. I think it was a little bit later than that, but that part kicked in. It was like the reason they went back to this time period, the reason, like, the whole plot of this book didn't start until like the second half of the book, and then it like flew through that, and that part was interesting. But the first half, where they were getting adjusted to this, I didn't care as much about, which is unfortunate because there was a lot of information in that first section that you kind of needed for the rest of the book. Like, we learned a lot about Matthew and like his past and why he is the way that he is and why he is so overprotective and a lot of stuff like that. We learn a lot about lineage as well within this book. I think I mentioned in the last section that there was a small part in the first half of this book that I did really enjoy. The location we went to was interesting to me, but I just didn't care. Like, I just couldn't care about the characters. I couldn't really care about what was going on. It did interest me by the end, so that like I wanted to continue. I mean, obviously I was going to continue with the third book, but I wanted to continue with the third book. But I don't know what it was about this one and why it didn't work. There was nothing drawing me in plot-wise that I just felt like I needed to pick it up. Like I think I mentioned earlier, if I wasn't reading this for a specific reason, I might have DNF'd it. I'm glad I didn't, because like I said, the ending was kind of worth it. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that we learned about her, and I liked that part, and it set up the third book really well, and we're back in a time period and with people that I like in the third book. So that's good. But there was just something about the second book, my intrigue and my enjoyment was just like very middle of the road. I feel like I just didn't care about these characters. So there's not a whole lot to add to my thoughts when I hit the halfway point, but I did give it 3 stars. So it was enjoyable to some extent. Like, if it had continued, I would say, if it continued in the same vein as the first half of the book, this probably would have gotten a 2. But because the second half was more enjoyable and more entertaining as far as plot goes, that's why it got a 3. So, not my favorite, but I'm okay with it because, like I said, we learned a lot, and it set up the third book really well, which I have started and actually been listening to almost nonstop today. So I'm not too far into it. I'm on chapter 10. I'm 130 pages into the book. So I'll come back to you when I hit maybe halfway point, maybe a little bit farther than halfway point. I'm about a fourth of the way through this book, and I'm already enjoying this way more. I don't think this is going to be a 5-star. Like, there has to be a lot in this book to make this a 5-star, but it's definitely on the path to become a very strong 4-star. And like I said, we're back in a time period that I enjoy with characters that I enjoy, and we're learning a lot about Diana's magic in the present day. Whereas this one we're trying to learn about her magic in the past. And so now that we kind of know more about who she is and what she's doing and why why things didn't work for her in the past, we're starting to learn more about her. And then there's a lot of family secrets that are coming out in this one too. But overall, this one's already in the 130 pages I've read so far, more enjoyable than the entirety of this book. So I'm excited to see where we go. I'm excited to see the end goal. Matthew is just still driving me nuts so far. He reminds me so much of, I know I've said it before, but like Edward from Twilight, just in his protectiveness of her. And there's reasons why he's so protective. It's not just like, I'm protective because she's a human and fragile, like he is in Twilight. There are specific reasons why he is the way that he is. But still, it's just a lot. But what I am enjoying is that like his friends and family are kind of calling him out on it and trying to talk to him about maybe not freaking out and being as protective as he is, because Diana is so headstrong. and there's some other circumstances going on that's going to cause issues in the future if he continues this way. So I'm interested to see his plot and how this is, but I'm loving that we're seeing the characters that we met in the first book again. It's really nice to have all these people back. We're learning a lot about magic in this book. This book specifically, I think we learned a lot more about Matthew. I mean, we did learn about magic. We learned about Matthew and his history. This one we're learning more about Diana. So we'll see. This is supposed to be the end of the trilogy, so we'll see how this ends and how I feel going forward. But there's some stuff going on that I'm intrigued by, which is good, because I was super nervous going into this one after the events of the second book. So more positive than the last check-in, maybe, but I'll let you know when I make it maybe halfway, maybe a little bit farther than halfway in this book, if my thoughts continue the same way. So I finished this book. Yeah, I didn't come to you at the halfway point because I was so invested in what was happening in the story that I didn't even process that I had gotten to the halfway point. Although thinking about where the halfway point was, I'm not quite sure I would have had new thoughts about the end. So this book, as you can probably tell by the fact that I just flew through this, was really action-packed. It really kept my attention, which was great. I ended up giving it 4 stars because it still, like, wasn't amazing. The characters I liked way more than the second book, but, like, I wasn't in love with some things about this, which is why I didn't get a full 5 star. But still, I was like on the edge of my seat the whole time. When I say this is packed with stuff, it is packed with stuff. So could this have been multiple books? Probably. Should we have maybe split this into 2 different, like maybe some of the stuff that was in this book could have been in the second book? That probably would have made the second book better in my opinion, but there's a lot of stuff that she has packed into one book. So I would be wary of that going in, just because there's a lot. There's a lot of stuff that's going down in here. But I was hooked. That was the first point I wanted to make. The second point I wanted to make is this book is so dark. Like, I don't even know how to, like, I haven't processed. I purposely kind of didn't think about some of the stuff that was happening in this book because it's so dark. So I forgot to write it down, but like I know for a fact in this book specifically, I don't think I gave you trigger warnings for the second book, but there was definitely some stuff in the second book too. But like in this book, there's rape hinted at on the page. There is abuse on the page. There is torture in this book. There is child abuse in this book. Like, and it's all one character. It's the villain of this story who has been hinted at a few times, and it's not the person we expected it to be. I don't think. Going into the first book, you're not sure, like, this villain and this plot line is probably not even in your mind. But it gets so dark so fast, and like the last third, not even, the last like 50 pages of this book is really hard to read because they confront said villain, and said villain has taken one of the people we love and tortured them basically, and it is not fun to read. So that was rough going into this story. It's a very specific plot line, and what I found interesting about this book and why I think it was more interesting to me than maybe the last book was, is because there is a mystery element. And while there is a mystery element to this entire world and this entire like series, each book has its own mystery. We're trying to figure stuff out. This one had a very clear, like, here's what we're trying to do. Here's what we're trying to solve. And then there was actually like clues and things that they figured out throughout the story. So like, it wasn't just, here's the thing we're trying to solve, but I'm not going to give you any answers, and our characters aren't going to figure anything out for a very long time. And then at the end, I'm going to throw a bunch of stuff at you, whereas in this book, it's sprinkled through like it should be. So it was better. The moral of the story is that this one is much better. So that's kind of my thoughts. Like, I don't have a whole lot of thoughts on this because it's the third in the series. I don't want to talk a lot about plot stuff because like I said, dark, super, super dark. Check out other people's trigger warnings as well if you're going into this one, because there is some stuff in this book. But I think I'm not going to say no to continuing with the newer books in the series. I am happy that I'm stopping here, because I think I've Deborah Harknessed myself out. Like, I just don't want to pick up her new stuff. Like, I thought about maybe like finding the 4th book and trying to fit it into this vlog, but I don't want to. I'm happy with how this is. It had an ending. I mean, obviously not everything is solved in this book, but it was like any other trilogy where, you know, there doesn't need to be more books in the series. This had an end. We're good. But if you wanted more, the 4th book follows Marcus, who's a character we met in the very first book. And we get to see a lot about him in the 3rd one. And so we get to see his kind of romance a little bit in the 4th book. And in the 5th book that's coming out, we follow Diana again, but like, it's like 7 or 8 years in the future. And we're learning about stuff, like, there's like stuff in her history that we don't know about. And I'm like, I learned enough. Like, this book concluded everything I needed to know. You're just adding for the sake of adding. So I'm not opposed, I think, to continuing with those 2 books. Now, only the 4th one's out. The 5th one comes out sometime this year. So I'm not opposed to continuing with those at some point. But for now, I feel content. So I'm happy with this. I finished it. I've had some family members who've been trying to get me to read this for a very long time. So I'm happy that I have succeeded in this. My library does have the 3 seasons of this TV show, so I might watch that. I'm curious. I really like the guy, like the actor who plays Matthew. I really like him. So I might watch the 1st season and see if it's worth it. I think that if you like, I know I said it before, but if you like the Outlander series, this is definitely, I think, a trilogy for you. There's some elements that are similar in my opinion. And I just think that there's just some stuff, like Outlander gets dark too, so it's not like this would scare you away from it. So there's just some things, some similarities and vibes and settings and things like that in this book that I think Outlander fans might enjoy. So, unrelated, but I did it. I finished these 2 books. This was a whirlwind of emotions. We started with the 2nd one, which was not great in my opinion, and we ended up with this one, which ended up actually being pretty good. So I feel accomplished. Like, there was only 2 books, and they are pretty chunky books, but they are like dense. So I feel very accomplished in having read both of these. So there we go. There we have it. I finished the series. I don't think I would have ever finished this one. I definitely wouldn't have picked up a 3rd one after the 2nd one if it wasn't for this video. So I'm really glad that I did, because the 4th one was, or the 3rd one was better. So that's where we're at. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know all your bookish thoughts down below if you've read this series, or if there's a series you'd like to see me do something similar to this on. I would love to know all your thoughts down below. But if you like this video, and I very much hope that you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you'd like to be part of this awesome growing family. I also got all my social media down there, as well as other fun bookish links, so remember to check all that out, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!